Child Abuse as Sex Magic and Sexual Research. Aleister Crowley and Alfred Kinsey, Occult, Yorkshire 14. Published by Autoculture, WordPress.com. For that group, the Book of Books was Davidson's History of Education. William James called its author a knight-errant of the intellectual life, an exuberant polymath. Its purpose was to dignify a newly self-conscious profession called education. Its argument, a heady distillation of conclusions from social Darwinism, claimed that modern education was a cosmic force leading mankind to full realization of itself. John Taylor Gatto, Underground History of American Education. Not knowing is the hardest part. There is something in the human brain, mine at any rate, that can't let go of an unsolved mystery, especially when it pertains directly to the organism's survival. Of course, it's not, as far as I know, a matter of survival for me to solve this mystery now. But it may have once been exactly that, or perhaps the reverse. It may have been a question of personal survival not to see, identify, or talk about this mystery. Even this, of course, is speculative. All I know for sure is that I am driven to sift through all this information, to the point that the muscles in my shoulders are becoming painfully tight, arrange it into some sort of coherent order, and present it to others, to the world, in the hope that it will make a case for something. The trouble is, I am not sure for what. In the Evening Standard report from the 27th of May 1994, regarding the Islington Care Home child abuse, Stuart Payne and Eileen Fairweather wrote that, for years a group of gay social work academics were able to abuse young boys with terrifying ease, shielded, unwittingly, by colleagues who didn't dare challenge their views on child sexuality for fear of appearing anti-liberal. They described Scotland Yard's Obscene Publications Squad as investigating a network of gay intellectuals who are believed to have run child sex rings for decades through schools and children's homes. Ref. When I was growing up, I was not exactly surrounded by gay intellectuals, but they were certainly around, and I was suffused in the sort of liberalism that would have been afraid to challenge pro-pedophilia views, at least if they were coming from respected peers within the cultural community. Maybe this would have even extended to the point of shielding abuse. Certainly, it is not at all hard for me to believe, but again, it does not prove that any abuse happened, much less that members of my family were involved. One of the things I concluded about my brother's carefully crafted public persona as a dandy, drug user, and sexual libertine, was that it was an elaborately disguised cry for help, that he had been engineered through trauma to become the clothes horsely that he was, and that his every insistence on being his own man was an unconscious cry from the soul of the very opposite truth, that he had been colonized internally by a malign force. This piece is neither disguised nor unconscious as a cry for help, and yet it's perhaps equally irrational, since I neither expect help to come nor believe that I need it from anywhere or anyone outside of me. That time has long passed. Even so, some of the individuals who could have intervened on my behalf as a child are still alive, and they are implicated, some directly, in this investigation. But the main participants, those who were either most responsible or who could most effectively have intervened, or both, my grandfather, my father, my brother, are all dead. They are, or were, also the principal carriers of the Fabian legacy which I have inherited, being the firstborns of the firstborn. And since they are gone, I am now the only surviving son of the firstborn son of Alec Horsley. The buck stops here. If this written exploration is for anyone, besides myself and those very few surviving family members willing to look at the hidden aspect of their heritage, it's for those that have passed on. Perhaps there are family members being wrongly implicated by this piece. There is always the possibility that even my grandfather was duped, that he was a useful liberal idiot, oblivious to the geopolitical social engineering agendas that were moving, like vast cosmic tides, around and finally over his castles in the sand. Yet, if one of those sandcastles is Northern Foods, possibly the largest food conglomerate in Europe, whose legacy in geopolitics continues to this day, it seems rather naive, not to mention a disservice both to Alec and to history, to suppose so. Before I get to the geopolitical picture and how Northern Foods influence, via my uncle Lord, or is it Baron? I can't keep track of these peerages, Haskins, continued into the 2000s. I want to return to the intersection of progressive leftist movements with homosexuality, within the already described larger context of social reform, economics, psychiatry and the medical establishment, hallucinogens, literary movements and liberal intellectualism, pedophilia and, most distressing of all, intelligence operations in mind control. That means going back to the beginning once more. A decade after the founding of the Fabian Society, in 1897, the Order of Carinea was founded by George Cecil Ives, friend of Oscar Wilde. It was a secret society for the cultivation of a homosexual, ethical, cultural and spiritual ethos. It was secret because homosexuality was illegal at that time and homosexuals needed a means of underground communication. The organization was inspired by and closely tied to the Uranian movement, Uranian being a 19th century term that referred to a third sex, originally someone with a female psyche in a male body, who was sexually attracted to men. Although there's no mention of Aleister Crowley in the records of the Order of Carinea, they could hardly have been unaware of one another, since Crowley was both a pioneer of sexual liberation and a practitioner of homosexual sex. The subject of sexual magic, while it's really of central importance to this investigation, is one I've avoided until now, because it becomes all too easy to lose the ground of factual reportage once strayed into more esoteric and philosophic waters. However, it's worth mentioning in brief, having just come across this material myself via author Phil Hines' website, that the Theosophical Society, tied to the Fabians via Annie Besant, was implicated in child sexual abuse in the early 1900s because of Charles Leadbeater. Canadian sociologist Stephen Kent writes in Religious Justifications for Child Sexual Abuse in Cults. Leadbeater's practice of sex magic involved homosexual abuses, but this tradition is by no means limited to homoerotic activities. Leadbeater was a pederast, and he used the Theosophical Society to gain access to boys so that he could engage them in various forms of sex magic. See Washington, 1995, page 121. Remarkable, perhaps, about Leadbeater's pederasty was that he was able to sanctify it under the guise of spiritual training. Apparently, Leadbeater taught a sexual technique to an inner circle of initiates who claimed that the energy aroused in masturbation can be used as a form of occult power, a great release of energy which can, first, elevate the consciousness of the individual to a state of ecstasy, and second, direct a great rush of psychic force towards the logos for his use in occult work. According to Hines' Breeding Devils in Chaos, Homosexuality and the Occult, this gave rise to the rumors that there existed groups of black magicians who obtained occult power by psychically vampirizing young boys. Author, Dion Fortune, alleged that there was a conspiracy of male occultists who used homosexual techniques to build up what she called dark astral power. She also blamed the decline of the Greek and Roman empires on those cultures' relaxed attitude to homosexuality. Although she never named any of these black adepts, it is clear that she was probably referring to C.W. Leadbeater, and perhaps, also Aleister Crowley. Hine refers to Crowley's male lover, the poet Victor Newburgh, his partner in a series of homosexual sex magic operations known as the Paris Working, where Newburgh and Crowley performed a series of invocations using anal intercourse as the means of achieving gnosis. The 6-week ritual included strong drug use, as well as the occasional attendance of a Liverpudlian journalist named Walter Duranty. Inspired by the results of the working, Crowley authored his treatise on sex magic, Liber Agape. Following the working, Newburgh distanced himself from Crowley, Crowley cursed Newburgh, and Newburgh, allegedly, suffered a nervous breakdown. That was in 1914. A year before, in 1913, George Cecil Ives, along with Edward Carpenter and others, founded the British Society for the Study of Sex Psychology, BSSSP, to advance a particularly radical agenda in the field of sex reform. It was particularly concerned with homosexuality, aiming to combat legal discrimination against homosexuality with scientific understanding. Members included Havelock Ellis, George Bernard Shaw, and fellow Carinians Lawrence Houseman and Montague Summers, a clergyman with a leaning towards the occult who translated Malleus Maleficarum into English. Ernest Jones was also a member, and he is worth lingering on. In the early 1900s, Jones had worked with and mentored under Wilfred Trotter, of Tavistock. He experimented with hypnotic techniques in his clinical work and applied Freudian psychology as an inspector of schools for mentally defective children. In 1906, he was arrested and charged with 2 counts of indecent assault on 2 adolescent girls he was interviewing. In court, Jones insisted the girls were fantasizing and was acquitted. He founded the British Psychoanalytical Society in 1919 and was president until 1944. In 1931, the BSSSP was renamed the British Sexological Society, and it seems to have continued until some point in the 1940s. It was largely through Jones' advocacy that the British Medical Association officially recognized psychoanalysis, in 1929. There's that year again, the same year that idiocy became a diagnostic term for a congenital defect, and the London School of Economics began its training courses for psychiatric social workers. In Germany in the 1930s, homosexual groups and individuals were being targeted as subversives, and eugenics were becoming national policy. In the 1940s, many countries in Europe, starting with Iceland, decriminalized homosexuality. In 1948, Alfred Kinsey published Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, revealing to the public that homosexuality was far more widespread than was commonly believed. The book also reported Kinsey's findings about child sexuality. Tables 31 to 34 were the tables or lists in the book which purported to display the number of times infants and young children were aroused when the researcher attempted to masturbate them. The table noted that many of the infants cried and fought against this so-called clinical research. Even though this obvious sexual abuse of children was displayed in the text of the work itself, a study often said to have kick-started the sexual revolution, it was not until 1981 that Dr. Judith Reisman drew attention to the implications. Her charges were eventually confirmed, in the August 25, 1997, issue of The New Yorker, by James H. Jones, former member of the Kinsey Institute's Scientific Board of Advisors. They were then validated by the Institute for Media Education. According to Reisman, however, Jones avoided any mention of the hundreds of infants and children under Kinsey's control. These little ones could not talk or flee from the sexual assaults, both oral and manual, they endured from the Kinsey pedophile team, the trained observers, who used stopwatches as they raped the infants and boys to record their thing. Jones justifies these heinous and sadistic experiments by simply saying Kinsey desired to free society from its disapproval of adult-child sexual contacts. 1. In an audio-taped interview, Kinsey team member Paul Gebhard told Reisman that most of the research on children was done by one individual, a man with scientific training, and not a known scientist. The other cases were done by parents, and by nursery school personnel. The man with scientific training was known as Mr. X, later discovered to be Rex King, a serial child rapist responsible for the rape of more than 800 children. Some of these rapes were rendered to Kinsey in graphic detail, which he considered to be scientific research. Kinsey never reported King to the authorities, meaning that, for over 50 years the entire Indiana University Kinsey Institute team collaborated in covering up sex crimes perpetrated against children involved in its research. In 1992, Gebhard confirmed that some of the men on Kinsey's child sexuality team included child molesters who were easily obtained from prisons and pedophile organizations around the world. He also admitted to having personally collaborated in the child abuse inherent in Kinsey's research. A 1998 Yorkshire-produced documentary, Secret History, Kinsey's Pedophiles, uncovered more facts about the trained persons who participated in Kinsey's experiments, naming Dr. Fritz von Balasik, a notorious Nazi pedophile who contributed his child abuse data during the 20-year period of 1936 to 1956 to Kinsey's research database, Ref. Kinsey's research was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, Alfred C. Kinsey. A Life, by James H. Jones, W. W. Norton and Company, 2004, page 555. Kinsey corresponded with MKULTRA psychiatrist Ewan Cameron and was an admirer, and possible correspondent, of Aleister Crowley. Kinsey tried hard to obtain Crowley's sex magical diaries after Crowley's death, and even made a pilgrimage to Crowley's Thelema Abbey, where Crowley allegedly conducted sexual rituals that included children. Dr. Kinsey and the Institute for Sex Research, by Wardell Baxter Pomeroy, Yale University Press, 1972, page 413. James H. Jones described Kinsey as a militant propagandist, a sadomasochist and homosexual, campaigning with scientific cover and on tax-exempt funds for his goal of undermining American morality to establish a sexual utopia. Emphasis added. What's perhaps most remarkable about this hidden history is that it remains hidden to this day, despite being very much on public record. The 2004 Hollywood movie, Kinsey, with Liam Neeson, presented a glowing picture of the sexologist. Despite some protests, mostly from Christian activists, the film was well reviewed and won a bunch of major awards. Kinsey's reputation remains intact. How is this even possible in a cultural climate that views pedophiles as the most depraved and irredeemable of monsters? The answer would appear to be simple: science. Place blatant crimes in the context of science, and most people will not question them. NB. According to a source, Richard T. Cole, the above photo has been doctored. 1. The current Kinsey Institute director, John Bancroft, recently derided Dr. Reisman as a moralist and declared that she has no evidence that experiments were carried out on children. Yet, Bancroft admits that Kinsey was misleading, lied about the child sexuality experiments, and that those who do sex research on adults and children still have to keep going back to Kinsey. http://www.crosswalk.com/archive/dr-kinsey-the-un-american-marquis-de-shade-5184118.html